Hello! We're recording!
Hello,
Welcome,
we're virtual.
welcome to I'm That Witch!
I'm that witch. Hopefully that was
I
coordinated.
have no idea. So, for those of you listening, we're recording several episodes in one go today, just to kind of make sure that you listeners have all of the content to your heart's desire in August. But we're also in Florida, as some of you may know. So we have good old Tropical Storm Debby brewing right now. So we are recording from a distance over Zoom or Riverside FM. It's a version of that. So if there's any technical difficulties, we do apologize, but we wanted to make sure that there were episodes out for you guys to listen to in August. And then there's a chance we might be taking a little bit of a hiatus after that, just
Mm,
with some life circumstances, but you won't be left hanging in the balance too long. And I can always try and put out some bonus episodes if need be too. So,
yeah,
yay.
I know I'm making the move. I will no longer be a
My
Floridian,
bestie's moving a
but
gajillion
I am
miles away, which is a completely legitimate and accurate representation of distance, just so you know, with gajillion miles.
correct. Yeah, so I'll be making the move, and that's why we're taking a little bit of a break, just to kind of figure out next steps, and we'll have to see from there. But I'm really excited to hear your episode today while we enjoy the absolutely crazy rain that's
I
going
know,
on
I'm hoping
outside.
that, like, the mic isn't picking up too much of, like, background noise. Um, but, all right, so I'm going to start us off today. Um, so, uh, As is the case with many of the people that we talk about, the woman we're talking about today was not truly a witch, although she was a pagan. And above all, she was a
Hmm.
scholar. So, this is the story of one of the last great thinkers of Alexandria, the well known and well respected astronomer, philosopher, and mathematician Hypatia. Woo.
Let's go.
Um, Okay, so our setting is Alexandria, Egypt, somewhere between 350 and 370 Common Era. At this time, Alexandria is an intellectual and cultural hub that carries a lot of Greek and Roman influences, and it is, of course, the home of the famous Library of Alexandria, which is believed to be one of the largest and most significant libraries in the ancient world. And it's also home to the Library of Alexandria's quote unquote daughter library, which was essentially just a collection of literature stored in the Temple of Serapis. There are many different religious beliefs existing side by side in Alexandria at this time, albeit not always harmoniously. But the three most prominent
Mm.
being paganism, Judaism, and the relatively new at the time belief of Christianity. However, none of the religions interfered with politics at the time. The church and civil matters in Alexandria were largely kept separate. And around this time is also when scholars believe Hypatia was born. They used to believe it was around 370 in Common Era, but modern scholars believe it was more likely around 350. So Hypatia's father was a scholar named Theon of Alexandria, and he was known for his work in mathematics and astronomy. He wrote a lot of commentaries on existing mathematical literature at the time. Not much is known about Hypatia's early life. In fact, we don't even really know who her mother was or if she had any siblings. What we do know is that she was very well educated and that she followed in her father's footsteps by becoming an astronomer and mathematician. Hypatia contributed to her
Mm.
father's works and later wrote works of her own, including commentaries on existing works such as, I'm going to hopefully pronounce this right, Conics by Apollonius. So in these commentaries, she broke down Apollonius's work into teachable material, and it became the foundation of modern geometry. Um,
Wow.
aside,
Did she, was
no,
this,
go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. I know we're we're gonna be overlapping today. I already know it. Was this typical of that time? for women to be working in that capacity, or was it just the kind of circumstances she was born into with their father?
So I think that part of it definitely was the circumstances, although I don't think it was too terribly uncommon for women to be educated at that time. This was the time of the works of like Aristotle and Plato and the great thinkers and philosophers. So women, I think, still had a lot of access to education. But Hypatia definitely kind of went above and beyond in that capacity. Um,
Mm.
Including, I mean, she went on to make like celestial maps and invented the hydrometer, which measures density of liquids, and she was very studied in philosophy as well. So she believed in here we go, Neoplatonism? Question mark. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments.
Neo Pla Platoism or
Well,
no?
there's an
Pla
N in there.
Platonism.
Platonism, possibly. It essentially proposed this idea that all of reality can be derived from one principle, just called the one. There's obviously like a lot more complex uh, kind of workings of it, rather than just that vague statement. But just, I guess, suffice to say, Hypatia was considered a pagan for those beliefs, and she never married, she never had children. Um, and she's believed to have adopted a celibate lifestyle, possibly in agreement with Plato's belief in abolishing the family system. So she was like, no babies for me, no ma'am. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, so I think she had, I think, higher access to education, but I do think that access to education wasn't completely uncommon for women at the time. Um, what
Mm.
made Hypatia stand out most of all, though, I think, is that she also was a teacher, which I think was uncommon for women at the time. She was a lot like Plato and Aristotle in that she taught philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy in public forums. And rather than dressing
Mm.
in like feminine clothing, she wore the robes of a scholar and held talks and demonstrations to educate the masses about the most prominent theories on celestial movement and how to create tools to measure it. So she was like bringing that information to the masses, um, which you would think
A mask queen for the masses, one might say.
exactly, exactly, which you would think, these stories that would make her a bigger target. Um, but Hypatia was actually really well regarded and was believed to be one of the greatest minds in Alexandria. So she taught people of all
Mm.
religious backgrounds, earned respect from people in very high places, including the governor of Alexandria, who was a man named Orestes. Um, Unfortunately, we don't have any existing works of hers. They were lost in the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. But we do have a lot of existing
Mm.
documentation of her from the works of people who knew her, and her pupils and her students. So, in a lot of those works, she's described as being beautiful and fair of form. And then Socrates, not OG Socrates, but Socrates Scholastus of Constantinople, um, said of her,
Little little
yeah, little
Socrates.
Socrates Jr. um, so he said of her, quote, there was a woman at Alexandria named Hypatia, daughter of the philosopher Theon, who made such attainments in literature and science as to far surpass all the philosophers of her own time, having succeeded to the school of Plato and Plotinus. She explained the principles of philosophy to her auditors, many of whom came from a distance to receive her instructions. On account of the self
Mm.
possession and ease of manner which she had acquired in consequence of the cultivation of her mind, she not infrequently appeared in public in presence of the magistrates. Neither did she feel abashed in coming to an assembly of men, for all men, on account of her extraordinary dignity and virtue, admired her the more. End quote. So she was very, very well respected by men of her time. Um, must be nice.
Right. That's incredible. I mean, what a
Honestly,
quote.
like just really singing her praises there.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like she stood on business.
Yeah. Of course.
She was the mainstay.
I mean, she was considered to be just a very extraordinary, not just an extraordinary woman, but an extraordinary person and scholar. Um, but of course, these stories rarely end well. So you may have guessed it.
As we
You may
know.
have guessed Hypatia runs into some trouble. uh, Realistically, it was Orestes, the aforementioned governor, who ran into trouble. But of course, what happens when men behave
Mm,
badly, women get the blame. So tale as old as time. Um,
yeah.
um, so in 390 Common Era, the daughter library in the Temple of Serapis that we mentioned earlier was destroyed under the guidance of a bishop named Theophilus. And this is really when we start seeing pagans being targeted in Alexandria. Um, so, like this bishop, he was a Christian or Catholic, same thing, but because Catholicism was the only type of Christianity that existed yet. But he destroyed these works, and that's when we see like pagans really starting to be targeted. And then when Theophilus is replaced by a
Mm,
bishop named Cyril, the religious persecution just ramps up. And now it's not just pagans being targeted, but also Jews. So in the 400s, we're seeing a lot of
mm,
religious conflict. And what seems to kick off Hypatia's downfall is that a group of Christians were killed by a group of like Jewish citizens who are considered extremists. And as a result, Cyril led a charge to run the Jews out of their homes in Alexandria. And their homes and businesses were basically just looted and destroyed. Now, Cyril was a bishop, so he was in charge of the Christian church in the area, but that gave him no political authority to do this. Um, that still remained with Orestes. So Orestes, he was like, Cyril, dude, like he was not happy that he did this. So he went to,
not
he's like,
cool,
yeah,
bro.
so not chill.
Not
And
cool.
should be also noted, Orestes was a Christian, but he believed that politics and religion should be kept separate. So, like, good for him. Um, he
Let's
went to
go.
the Roman government in Constantinople and he complained about Cyril. He's like, come get your boy. And Cyril was not happy about that. So he, in true holy fashion, got together a group of his followers and tried to assassinate Orestes. And you may have guessed by attempted to assassinate that they were unsuccessful. So now Orestes is on his guard. He's got extra security. And Cyril thinks, what's the next best thing to killing the governor? I know. How about we go for the pagan scholar who's educating the masses with her sinful philosophy,
Mm,
naturally. So Cyril has to go about it, sneakily. He can't make a martyr out of her. So instead, he starts a rumor that Hypatia was interfering in matters between him and Orestes, and he's saying she's beguiling and influencing Orestes to turn his back on the Christian church, and is probably using witchcraft and satanic wiles to do it. This rumor gets around, and it incites a group of Christian extremists led by a man named Peter to attack Hypatia in 415. Common Era is when that happened. So she was known to drive her own carriage around town. She didn't have like servants or drivers do it for her. She wanted to be able to maneuver the city on her own and independently. So this group of people led by Peter, um, pulled her from her carriage, and they dragged her into a nearby church where they stripped her of her clothing, beat her with roof
mm.
tiles, and then dragged her through
Oh,
the street to a place called Cineron, and they set her body on fire. So,
oh
yeah,
my
pretty
God.
horrifying. Uh, and there have been a variety of writings about this event kind of after it happened. Many people wrote of the injustice of it, recognized that, and they condemned Cyril for murdering Hypatia in the name of political jealousy. But others who were more religiously inclined took Cyril's side and branded Hypatia a seductress and a witch. Um, Unfortunately,
She couldn't
I
just be a
know, like,
baddie.
especially like seductress, really, like we're all talking about how she took a vow of celibacy and now she's seductress. Where's this coming from? Uh, so, unfortunately, Hypatia's brutal murder has kind of colored what we know about her because her intelligence and her influence only exist in the context of her untimely end, especially given that things that she wrote and contributed to were largely destroyed. First, with the destruction of the Temple of Serapis, and later the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. Um, However, we do know just from the people that she taught who continue to kind of share her works and share what they learned from her, that we can likely credit much of our knowledge of geometry and celestial movement to Hypatia's teachings. And that is the story of the definitely not a witch, but absolute badass that was Hypatia of Alexandria.
What a
I
tragic
know.
ending. And I don't know if you maybe explained it a little earlier, but can you speak a little bit about like what in terms of like like how did is there any documentation of like how she practiced paganism?
So it seems like um so I'm sorry if there was a noise in my microphone just then. I just I
A little
just
slurp.
took a sip from my ghost shaped mug and set it down right next to my microphone like a smart person. Um, so it seems like she was considered a pagan, mostly because she practiced like an older belief system, or an older believed in an older philosophy rather than this kind of Judeo-Christian thing that had that was more prominent in the area. There were um, a lot of what would be considered pagan beliefs in Alexandria at the time, but as time was going on and Christianity was kind of taking hold, they were they were largely being persecuted and branded as satanic, despite the fact that she would not have believed in Satan. Um, Primarily,
Yeah.
she was labeled as a pagan because of that Neoplatonism question mark, um,
Mm,
which was is interesting because there's record, or I don't know if it's record or rumor, that one of her students who learned this philosophy from her took a lot of what she taught about this concept of like all being one, in Neoplatonism, and applied it to his Christian belief, and that's kind of how he influenced the teaching of like the Holy Trinity, which is three in one. Um, so like
mm.
God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit being like the Holy Trinity, and they're all one despite being three. So it seems like even though she herself didn't believe in Christianity, she still had an influence on it because she taught people of all backgrounds too.
Yeah. I didn't, what a, you know, what a stark difference to all the people we've been talking about, especially in the beginning of this podcast, where it's a heavily Judeo-Christian society that most of these people are set in. And I think this episode and our last one, or one of our last ones on, who am I thinking about? In Greece. Oh my
Oh,
God.
it was yours. Theoris?
I know, and I can't remember off the top. Yes, Theoris of Lemnos. I could not remember the name for the life of me. Theoris, the similarities between Theoris and the society in which she's living in Greece, which I think is not that far off time-wise
Yeah,
comparatively
I
to
don't
her,
think so. I
to
think that
Hypatia.
they're kind of in similar timelines, and honestly very similar probably culturally too, because
In terms of like
yeah,
enlightenment.
there's a lot of philosophical ideas and ideas on mathematics and astronomy going around at that time.
Yeah. But what an absolute
I know.
gangster. She just really showed up, and I think that the way that you framed it of like it was an easy target for them to go after her next, and in such a brutal way. It's just so sad, but I mean really important to recognize her impact even today.
Yeah, yeah. It makes me sad that we only really know of her work like is like that it's colored by the context of her murder, but it's
Yeah,
amazing that her stories, like, you know, were still like the story of her was still able to live on, and who knows if we would have had that if she hadn't been murdered, because all of her work was destroyed. um so like, would people have still been writing about her and talking about her if they weren't writing about her in the context of like her being killed?
yeah, exactly. Oh,
I know.
tragic. Absolutely tragic. But how interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that with us
Thank
today.
you. um all right, so that's wrapping up
Now,
this episode. Thank you
resume.
guys so much for listening. We will have another episode for you next week, brought to you by Maddy. And yeah, you know what to do. If you like this episode, give us a like, follow us, share it with your friends. Follow us on social media on Instagram or TikTok. Love Which Spells 13 on TikTok. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
See you next time, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm That Witch is researched, written, and hosted by Maddy Guerra and Bridgette Golden, edited by Bridgette Golden. You can find more episodes on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your podcasts. You can also find us on social media on Instagram at Love Which Spells or TikTok at Love Which Spells 13. Make sure to like and subscribe if you liked what you heard today and want to hear more. Thanks for listening.